So we begin as usual with a small prayer for teacher-student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Viddhishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May that one grant us energy and vigor and success in our studies. May we generally gain health and strength. And may we not cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So welcome everybody. This is the Vedanta series, which is labeled as question and answer. And if there are no questions, there are no answers. So this is your opportunity to ask some questions or express what is on your mind, and we can deal with it for the next hour. So I'm going to keep quiet for a few moments while, if you have such a thing, you can unmute yourself and ask this question.
So we have heard many times from you saying that we are all here to do the cleaning, and it's a process. So for us, in a worldly life, there are so many things that trouble us, that makes us dirty, even though we don't want to be that person. We knowingly or unknowingly become that person or do something small or big, right? Which even if we know that it's wrong, we end up doing it and then we feel sorry for it. So in a life like this, where we have to continuously encounter people, who might bring the qualities that we don't want to manifest in ourselves sometimes. I know the answer is going to be we have to be in control of it, but then, it's not always possible. So how can we help ourselves, to be in control of those things when we get provoked or, when we encounter such situations in everyday life and, have that love in us always. It's difficult to see the Paramatma in everyone, even though we know that's the truth. And the other being, nobody is perfect. We know all that, but at sometimes it doesn't really stay with us when we are in that moment. How can we, remind ourselves of that and keep in control when we are in that situations?
Thank you. That's a very good question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So if we consider ourselves as a unit, individual unit, then we have an environment. We always have had an environment. The environment for a baby is very simple, very primitive, but gets more sophisticated as the child grows a little bit more. And then we have the opportunity. So far, we have no control over our environment. Our environment is imposed, as it were, on us. We are born into an environment. Of course, we believe that we actually created the environment. We created a set of parents and a geographic region and a specific culture. And this is driven, according to our theory of karma, by our desire. So our desire for a certain environment manifests in this concrete world, and it is primarily made from frustration. So I often tell a story about this, that supposing you have a poetic mind and you think that a stream wants to find its way and join and unite with the ocean, then unfortunately or fortunately, we can't put any bias on it. Rocks are in the way, obstacles are in the way, and it gets frustrated. And even if it arrives in the ocean has this urge, and it wants to unite with the center of the earth, the iron core, and its rocks are in the way internally. And the earth wants to unite with its parent sun, and its inertia gets in the way, and it gets frustrated. And the whole of the solar system wants to unite with the rest of the galaxy. That's why it's circling it. the urge, the ecliptical urge is there, and it gets frustrated. Its inertia is also in the way. And the galaxy wants to join with other clusters of galaxies with which it's related, and that cluster wants to merge with the whole universe, and universal expansion is in the way, and it gets frustrated. Now, if it wasn't for the law of frustration, none of these operations would happen. This universe would not be here. So we have to accept that life has obstacles. But we can manage these obstacles. We can learn to manage these obstacles as we grow. What is our world outside, as it were, of ourselves would be other people, other places, other events, other scenes. And we have to try as much as possible to protect ourselves. Supposing there is somebody with an alcohol problem, would it be a good idea to meet his or her friends in a pub? Probably not. The temptation will be too strong. And after a while, they take one sip becomes a pint becomes a bottle becomes a saturation in the alcohol to the point of that the alcohol takes control. So in some way or another, we all have an addiction. Now, the word addiction, of course, is a very strong term. But yet, when you look at the central desires we have, it is driven by an addiction. And this is what we dealt with actually on the Enneagram, that all of and we use that word addiction, by the way, that we see when we discover the individual psychology of every personality, there is a central drive that aims to keep us in this state of frustration. And so we really have no business to complain about it, but yes, we should manage it. So the first thing is try to avoid these people, these places, these events that are likely to upset the mind. Now, often this is not possible. So where it's not possible, we have to have a well-structured formula to deal with the situation. And that means we have to prepare, we have to recondition, as it were, the mind. And so this is where scheduled time, selected time for sitting, as it were, and praying, meditating, and doing japa, repetition of God's name, doing it lovingly. And this series keeps the mind in a buffered condition, a prepared condition, a preemptive condition. Just to remind you, Sri Ramakrishna's advice to householders, what he said was, always sing the glories of the divine. Now, that is an inward movement because singing requires feeling. He says this because we talk to ourselves in words, and the words have corresponding pictures, but it has absolutely no meaning unless it's joined with some feeling. There has to be a feeling of adoration, thankfulness, love that accompanies this. And then lovingly repeat God's name. We call this japa. Japa is free. There's no tax as far as I know on japa. So it's one of those rare things that are free and easy to practice. We can practice it any time, in any place, in any condition. We can practice it 24 hours of the day. No special skills are required to repeat it. And it can be an ongoing thing. Even when we're busy with other activities, it can be an undercurrent going on. Continuous loving repetition of God's name. We know that if you want to draw somebody's attention, you call their name. And if you are in a human relationship and it is fresh and young, then you'll find the two parties will be unconsciously repeating each other's name because it calls to mind the entity. In that same way, when we repeat God's name, it recalls this entity to mind, or at least recalls its presence, even if we're doing it in a kind of unconscious way. Unconscious means a habitual background. You may have heard a song or a piece of music, and that just repeats on a loop the whole day to the point sometimes of nuisance. I wish it would go away, but it sticks there. Of course, God's name is much more delightful. And then we can vary it. We vary it with all the various qualities. When we sit down with our personal ideal of God, this should be so intimate and personal that we should be exchanging terms of endearments, exchanging loving glances, allowing ourselves to be looked upon with love and returning this in a loving way. Why should God be loved? Because God is lovable. What we call God comes in the form of grace that flows everywhere, but we have to notice it. So it's the art of noticing this. And just to recall, just to remind you, this technique I call OAT, O-A-T with a small s. What it means is we have to learn to be more observant, because so far we've dealt with the external environment, but there's also an internal environment of the mind where a reaction takes place. We have to learn to be observant in the external world, thoroughly observant. We can take this first as an example. We know that there are certain people that we may or may not get along with easily. We find that there's a friction, but we can never truly say that person or that event is the cause of our unsettlement. We are our cause. We have to take responsibility for it. So it is our own reaction that is there. And that means we have to play something of a game. We have to make an internal observation which sees a reaction come up. And as it comes up, we have to notice it. And when we've noticed it, we can't repress it. We have to allow it to come. We have to allow it to go. But bear in mind that the Lord has given us a playground called time and space. Given enough time, given enough space, we can control something. And if we do it in a sporting way, with a sense of humor, this world can be viewed and taken so negatively. The real antidote is a sense of humor. We have to see the sense of fun in it. We have to learn to see the world as God sees it. So we have to learn the technique of standing where God stands, or let's put it more beautifully, sitting on God's throne and viewing things as he views them. We have to do this from time to time. And the profound and deep opportunity to do this is meditation. And so we have to use this time, preferably minimum twice daily, a kind of separate time where we go into seclusion. And this is Ramakrishna's next point. From time to time, go into solitude. Of course, he may give these in different orders. So I'm summarizing. So from time to time, go into solitude. This is why we collectively go on retreat. But with this opportunity not available to us now, because of the COVID virus and so on, we still have an opportunity to go off and take the time off and visit some beautiful scenes. More than ever with the COVID virus, the people of Ireland, unable to travel to locations such as Spain and Italy and so on holiday, have found that they need to resort to their local tourist areas. Ireland is such a beautiful place. Of course, the weather aside, never mind. But you know, even the weather is beautiful if you have an eye for it. I always remember I was here probably about a year in Ireland. And I said, so there's no sun here, not that we can see, and not that I'm used to anyway. So how do you cope with this? Oh, every year we go on to Spain, but it's very boring there. I said, what do you mean boring? Every day is only blue sky. We miss the variation of the Irish weather. They're a very peculiar way of looking at things from my point of view. So there's a beauty that we can find in everything and everywhere. We just have to look for it. And we have to have the capacity to observe and to listen, have a listening mind. And when we do this with a sense of humor in a sporting way, we can see that all these activities, people, places, events, they come as waves. They don't come all together in one surge. They come one thing at a time because we are operating within this framework, which we call time, that we can break down into incidental units. One unit comes, followed by another, followed by another. We can call it a second if you like. It might be even a split of a second. Nevertheless, some unit comes and we're able to observe a series. And when these series come, we should be able to stand back. We have the capacity to stand back because these do not, in a sense, belong to us. They're associated with us, but we cannot claim ownership. We can claim a witness position. That's the truth about it. And when we do that, then these things come and we can, in a controlled way, let them go, thank them for their occupation, but ask them not to stay as a squatter because new friends are there, and instantaneously use that moment to insert positive values by singing God's glories, by repeating his name, and by also buffering it by retreating from time to time, either physically in the area of Ireland with the mountains and sea or whatever appeals, even a miniature version of that, a park, go for a walk, take some physical exercise. Or, and not only or, I can say in addition, sitting there withdrawing the mind in what we call meditation. One approach is neither adequate nor desirable, and the advantage of this new great wave that we call Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Holy Mother, this holy trio, and their followers, is to assert emphatically that one approach is insufficient. Swami Vivekananda generally says, having described all the 4 approaches that we call yogas, one or more or all of these can be free. But really, if you see what he really means, is all of these, because we are not completely intellectual, we're not completely feeling, we're not completely willing, and we're not completely meditating. These are the 3 areas of the mind that need to be channeled. This is energy. All we have available to us, what we call the mind, is psychic prana. This is energy localized seemingly by us. Seemingly because there is no separation anywhere. The one thing we absolutely know is this universe is undivided. It looks to be divided, but energy is one. Matter is one. Matter resolves into energy. The equivalence of energy and matter is very clear. And it was the great scientist, the physicist, who I greatly admire, called David Bohm, who instantly understood this approach and had it verified and ratified in his own mind with great dialogues with the great mystic Krishnamurti. And there was convinced and translated it as much as he could into his science. If we approach things from a holistic way, things look extremely different. The symphony that we call life becomes extremely different. Of late, I came across some information about the great Beethoven and how he was constructing his music. For 200 years, people have been playing his music incorrectly. Imagine. Because they never noticed or never really took seriously his tempi, that is his timing. And once they took notice of it, classical pieces, which may in some way have driven you to insomnia, now become so vibrant, so energetic. And so it's the same with us. We need to see what different approach we have and have a great deal of interest and fun with it. Not take it as a burdensome thing, not take it as a struggle, but take it as a wonderful, wonderful game, a play of life, which is intrinsically part of our philosophy. What other reason can this world have for existing except it is God's divine play, him dancing with himself, no other entity present. Now, this concept is difficult to grasp when heard for the first time, that you are that divinity, that there is nothing more, you are that one without a second, you're the undivided, you're the immutable, is very counterintuitive to start with. And so we have to get used to the idea. But in getting used to this idea in principle, we have to catch it up with the emotions. There are two entities that we are really worshiping. The Maitri Upanishad is quite useful. There's a point there, since we're studying Vedanta, we should make reference to these Upanishads. And so it begins with this, Atanyatrapi Uktam. You see, and thus, it has been said elsewhere, there are truly two supreme principles, two Brahmans to be meditated upon. Sound and non-sound is how it's described. Shabda, sound and also non-sound is to be meditated upon. By sound alone is the non-sound revealed. So although we know the principles of the impersonal, the immutable, the infinite, the undivided, we have to take on board the seemingly divided sense, in this case described as Shabda, sound. And what is that sound? This is a whole passage, by the way, sixth chapter, the Maitri Upanishad, and this is the 22nd verse. And the whole section is actually on the principle of meditation. By meditating and evoking, and Patanjali Yoga Sutra says the same thing, this Om and any associated mantras that come along with it, by repeating this, in other words, by doing japa. Japa is not mindless repetition. Japa is repeating the word or the sound and meditating on its meaning. So it becomes an inward, accompanied by an inward movement. And we have to keep this going. So throughout the day, we have to be observant of what is happening. It's like kicking a ball up in the air and waiting for it to come down and making sure we know where it's landed and kicking it up again. We always have to keep the mind up. And when it comes down, up again, up again, up again. We have to learn the art of playing a game like this. Internally, watching this come. And then observing not only outside, but inside. But we go to the second part of Oates A. So being aware of what's going on, number one, what we now call mindfulness, but in the most profound way. And then secondly, to come up with this appreciation. Once we observe something properly, we will appreciate it. Let us take the most difficult person we know, or most difficult circumstance we know. If you examine it correctly and most profoundly and at depth, you will come to a series of amorphous waves that we call God, that we call the divine. It's only our view is distorted. And the source of our distortion is that we never observed ourselves properly. So the philosophical inquiry in Vedanta begins with this point. Who am I? What am I? And relentlessly pursue this until we find, aha, that is it. Tattvamasi, that thou art. Brahmasmi, thou art Brahman. Come to that point of actual understanding. We have to have the principle, no doubt. But the most difficult part is to rally the emotions to match it. And we do this in an emotional way. We do this with the full creativity of our imagination, which gives rise to the sense of appreciation. And then following that is thankfulness and gratitude. This is an internal movement. And once we keep this internal movement going, We forget about the ABC principles of it. It now becomes an experience, a delightful dance, a delightful way of looking at things, engaging in God's sport and play, and playing the part very well. And in any drama, there has to be variation. I don't know about now, but I always say in the older days, Bollywood movies used to have essential components. There had to be a villain. There had to be some kind of comedian, some person making fun. There had to be a hero or heroine. There had to be a chorus. There had to be music. All these components are necessary. So we have to have these people who would not be of sound character necessarily. It's part and parcel of the drama of life. There is no Ramayana without Ravana. There is no Mahabharata without Dhritarashtra or Duryodhana. There has to be this mix. There's no other way. There have to be heroes like Bhishma. There have to be heroes like Drona. There have to be characters that are committed to balance and harmony and dharma, Yudhishthira. And there has to be a skilled person, an archer, who can shoot an arrow to find its mark. There has to be all these components, but ever in all these dramas, God is there, guiding from behind. And the most wonderful thing in the Bhagavad Gita is this 11th chapter. In the 11th chapter, we can see the whole, or at least we can get a glimpse, a kind of feel, oh, there's a holistic thing to this. And I was mentioning David Bohm, and he saw things in a holistic way. He never saw things in a particular way. 8 billion, I think 8 or something of that order, $8 billion, maybe more, spent on a great experimental laboratory in Switzerland, across the Swiss-French border in Geneva, covering something like 24 miles, something of that order. And the result, they're looking at the particles. It's a bit like looking at one small pixel in a picture and trying to figure out, what is this? Where does it match in? When we stand back in the vantage point of an observer, we can see the whole totality of existence. And it now makes complete sense. It now gives us a sense of fulfillment. So we have to learn to see this holistic aspect more and more. And when, as will happen, when our reaction comes to an external event or person, we have to allow it momentary, its momentary play on its stage. The part of the drama, so please come, see my saying, come if you want, stay if you can, go if you must. In the meantime, be friendly, have a cup of tea, go if you must. There was a useful formula that I'm using when I was a small child, 5 years old, something like that. But now as an adult, I have new values, new friends, new things to insert. And I have the time available to insert it. This second, next second, next second, next second. Ramakrishna's fourth dimension of his recommended formula was keep holy company. Now, when we look at holy company, then this is the importance. I repeat, many times I repeat the same thing, but we have to endorse these same things, same values. But the value of coming to this ashram or any other holy place or going on pilgrimage, this value is huge. But it's not to go and get something. It's to be there and be in the present moment and absorb. This absorption, this mutual seeing is what we call darshana. There was a great saint, and I think it was John Vianney, Christian saint, who came across somebody for hours and hours on end in a church. And he was curious. So he ventured to ask, what are you doing all this time? I'd like to do the same. The man said, I'm doing nothing. I look at him and he looks at me. I lovingly look at him and allow myself to be loved and looked at by him. So this is what we call Holy Company. That is getting darshan. This is engaging the mind in an environment that is conducive to this purification that we're talking about, to this cleanliness. And what we mean by unclean, or what we mean by, all of these things, temptations, desires are there, but the central point of it is egoism. This connection that we have with this body and mind, instead of viewing it in an instrumental way, we're viewing it as an intrinsic component of ourselves. We're identifying ourselves. This is called embodiment. When we have this sense of embodiment, then we put ourselves in a certain section and then create a strategy against other people, places, and events on the other side. And so we have three options available to us. Arjun in the Mahabharata has three options available to him. He can fight, he can run away, or he can stand there completely mesmerized, hopelessly mesmerized. So these three components are really not workable. They are probably workable temporarily. And in the dialogue with Arjun that we call Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points this out from the start. It seems to be a good solution to run away, to withdraw. But from other people's point of view, it looks like cowardice. And from my point of view, it's complete delusion. You have a job to do. You have a duty to do. You should engage, but keep your mind fixed on me. And it's another way of saying, that's a devotional way of saying, that behind everything is this Atman. Now, yes, we can understand it in principle. It makes all logical sense. The one thing about Vedanta, all the principles make full logical sense. But there's this genetic drive that we have, which is tied up with this frustration I originally mentioned. And then if we don't know a proper way of handling it, it not only becomes frustrating, it's also negative, and also adds to the confusion, otherwise called the lack of cleanliness, this lack of purity. So we have to be sure, what do we mean when we say pure, impure, and so on? Pure means no ego is present. Let me rephrase that. No egoism is present. No sense of embodiment is present. No sense of I and mine is present. Two ways to handle this. One way is to see and feel the living presence of God equally everywhere. This requires creative imagination, but it's counter-creative imagination, because we are creating these fears and desires and temptations because of our imaginary position. On analysis of the time frame necessary, you'll see it fits either into the past or the future, or there's a non-movement from a present moment that can act as an impulsive stage, a reactive stage. Instead of doing all of that, we have the opportunity to use our creative imagination and see and feel silently, and make our silent namaste, make our namaskar to this Supreme Lord in front of us. How do we do this? We have to bypass a number of our different reactions. First thing we have to bypass is, if God is standing there, then it changes my perspective of myself. Suppose saying God walks into your living room, recognizably so, what will you do? Will you not sit him down or her down, give her at least a cup of tea, maybe give some of domestic scones, or what do you call it, domestic muffins, or whatever it is? You do all that, isn't it? There would be such a difference in your approach, but anybody who visits your house is the same, and we have to be convinced of this fact. And so our imagination has to imagine it. And that means we have to bypass the physical, and we have to understand what is the source of a person's eyes shining. Is it not the Lord shining through the eyes? Is it not the Lord that makes a sound through the speech, regardless of what the words are, whether they're insulting, whether they're sweet, whether they're bitter, regardless of what it is, we can have a penetrating vision. We learn that art, learn that technique. And it can begin in meditation. Your most difficult person, make the subject of your meditation. Say, Lord, please sit on your golden throne that I may put garlands around your neck and shower you with flowers and praises and holy water and fragrances and japa and so on. Let me do that. Sit on the floor. Let me offer you abhishekam. Let me do all the royal worship that is due a royal personage here. And then see, oh, that person is there. That will have the effect, unbeknown to you, of transforming that form, that name and form that we call an awkward person, but is in reality just a different waveform in this way, a different character on the stage of life, a different entity that is required to fulfill the drama, to complete the plot, to complete the play, without which the play would not be interesting. So this requires a sporting attitude, a different approach to life, built into our philosophy. Our philosophy tells us this is a game, this is Leela, this is Leela Maya. When you look at it closely, you'll find it's all indeterminate. It is all over the place. Things appear, things disappear. Our modern physics tells us this at the very lowest meaning, fundamental, not inferior. At the most fundamental level, we have sudden appearances, disappearances. We have things that are in the same place at the same time. We have a vague excitations in Hilbert space where it doesn't mean anything. It is just ways of expressing something that we know is there, but we can't quite define it because it just doesn't make sense in our everyday time-space bound environment. So a different approach has to be made. We have to have fun doing it and use all the resources at our disposal. Let's go back to holy company. So keeping holy company is important. And involved in that, naturally, we say the holy company most immediately available to us in a natural way will be the presence of an inspiring teacher, somebody who can give us a specific formula and specific guidance, some kind of guru that seems to match us. There seems to be a mutual, natural association, some wave that can guide us in a certain direction. And we have, fortunately, in our own more modern era, that is, only since the 19th century, we have this great giant wave of Ramakrishna. 2,000 years ago, this great wave of Jesus. 2,500 years ago, this great wave called Buddha, and some may say Chaitanya, and so on. All these waves will come. Dharma, you see. So according to the way of how we can adjust the harmony that is presented after maybe 500 years or so, that whose effect lasts for the next 1,000 years. So that, and then any descendant from that, would form this area of what we call guru. So keeping holy company, supposing we have no access to any of that, then make sure that you are practicing the presence of God. The most foundational book that I always recommend would be Practicing the Presence by Brother Lawrence, 18th century monk who was disappointed with his own life and decided, I'll go into a monastery and undergo terrible, terrible austerities and hardships, with one complaint at the end of it: I never was unhappy. I was always delighted and happy because always in the presence, always living in the presence. Now the presence is not absence. The presence is presence. It means I don't have to look around the corner for it or look in a distant place for it or wait and look out the window. Is it coming? Is it coming? It is there already. Where you sit right now, it is there. Where you absolutely sit at any moment in time, it is there. And this is where our scriptural books are so useful. I come as time. Many, on several occasions, this is said. Krishna says, I come as time, as this very second. It is there. Well, why can't we catch it? Because we need to tune the mind into it. This is, in a way, holy company. So keeping holy company, reading the scriptural texts will keep holy company. Understanding them, not just reading them, but reflecting and understanding them, bringing them in, absorbing them fully, and feeling this sense of purity. Purity is a condition, no doubt, but it's also a felt condition. It's also refreshment. You know, when you go and bathe the body, you feel clean, you feel purified, you'll feel fresh, you feel different, isn't it? In that same way, when you go into the mountain air and breathe in fresh air, there's a feeling of refreshment matching what you inhaled. There's the same thing. So inhale all the holy things that you can in terms of God's glories, in terms of his name, in terms of his environment, his special silence that can be provided by selecting a place from time to time, going into solitude there, or sitting in an hour where there is no disturbance. Typically early morning, no sound. Typically certainly in some places, 12 o'clock, in some places when geographically, those places where the sun is at its zenith, a lull. You find it in Mediterranean countries too, and in India as well, that the siesta time is there. Nothing is there, nothing is moving. That's the time when some keen aspirant will say, this is the time I should meditate. And then in the evening, at the junction of day and night, and as well, of course, at midnight. These are the four classical junctures of day and night that are conducive, so they say, to this resorting to a private still place. And in that stillness, it is only in the stillness will you find this perfection that we call God. What we mean by impurity, therefore, is all confusion and humdrum and disturbance in the mind. And when all that settles nicely, when we have a great faith and trust in everything, when we are able to take our attention and tune it efficiently and in a regular way, in a constant way, keep tuning, or like a ball being thrown up into the air as it comes down, kicking it up, keeping it always up, keeping the mind always high. We don't have to wait for challenges for us to do this. We can condition the mind systematically in this way. And we won't be hard on ourselves when we fail, because it's not really a failure. There are two ways to view sporting activities. One is hail criticism and negativity. The other one is to acknowledge some vulnerable area and then do coaching for improvement. It's a very different approach. And we should do that with others also. There's no room for criticism. Be friendly to all. Don't criticize anybody, Mother says. Rather find faults in yourself. And be generous enough to make the whole world your own. And make every stranger not a stranger. In other words, recognize this Lord of the universe in every set of eyes, in every verbal expression, in every physical movement, and in the whole environment that enables this to happen. And so, yes, what we call impurity is otherwise called forgetfulness. Forgetfulness of our own pristine condition. So the antidote is constant reminder. This is called abhyasa yoga, constant practice, constantly recalling God's presence to our mind. But this requires, if you're a devotee, it requires an engagement, a true engagement with your personal ideal of God. This Ramakrishna is the primary example of that. Was he a non-dualist? Was he a dualist? Was he a tantric? Was he an Advaitin? He was all of it. He managed to have a facile way of dealing with all of these things. And such a generosity of spirit and practice, showing us that we should engage all these approaches, since our estrangement is very, very difficult. And will take a long time if not attended to. We then introduce a catalyst. Shankaracharya makes a point of saying that we are fortunate that we have gone through so many millions and millions and millions of births to arrive with a human body. And even more fortunate if we have a social advantage about it. And even more fortunate if we have managed to find out the subtleties of truth. And more privileged are we, more advantaged are we if we have found a teacher. With all of these advantages, wouldn't it be, and he uses a strong concept, some kind of suicide if we don't use all of this and make an increased impetus in our efforts? Use all of this as a catalyst, not as a desperate struggle, but in a sporting, good humored way that engages all our skills and talents and abilities. And we are well equipped for it, so that we can take a flight to nobler heights. Just like taking an airplane flight. Airplane is necessary, runway is necessary, the design of the aircraft and wings made so that the air can create a lift. The air combined with the philosophy will make a lift, and that can be sustained at high altitudes for long distances. So we have to aim to elevate the mind in such a way that we keep it up and acknowledge when it comes down. We keep it up, put it up again, but we also have to be practical. I need to summarize a little bit. So we have to be selective about the company we keep in terms of people, places, and events. Sometimes that's difficult. And if it's difficult, then we have to make we have to shore up our character by constant, regular, steady practice. Practice consists of these four things that Ramakrishna has given us. That is, we have to have the observational faculty and employ it for appreciation. That appreciation and thanks comes out spontaneously and lovingly, repeating and glorying in God's glories. Secondly, constantly repeat his name, japa, the easiest of all spiritual practices. And thirdly, keep holy company. And fourthly, from time to time, see if you can go into solitude, whether it's by yourself in your house or systematic scheduled outings by yourself, where you have the luxury of communing fully and privately and silently with the author of this glorious universe, who is in it, through it, as it, and also beyond it. You see, when you talk of cleaning, you're talking of not a big revolution. If you want to clean your house, you don't say, okay, and nobody must spoil it. You keep cleaning it whenever it's necessary. Two examples are like that. I'll give you one small example in a story form, and many of you have heard it before. As you know, I'm not shy to bore you all and repeat it, but you see, a king gave a challenge. He had a huge hall, something like the Sistine Chapel, but with no pictures. Some kind of hall there with marble walls. And he engaged two very famous artists and said, so I have a great reward for the one who can make the best picture. You take this wall and you take this wall. And we'll come along. Many prominent artists will come. And I, the king, will also come, the one that has engaged you. And I will give a huge reward that will enhance your reputation to the one who has the best painting. So the one sets up a scaffolding like Michelangelo does and started with all the colors and so on. There was no prohibition to bring students along, so students came along as well. You know, Michelangelo was really just filling in colors. He already outlined, and what we call punched. It means you take some paper with insert perforations in, and you make your diagram and you put that on the wall, and then you make these holes and perforate. There's an outline. So you have the figures there in charcoal. To this day, you can still see charcoal marks of where he did it. And then the students can come along and then they can coordinate the colors and he'll supervise. Like that, he did it, one wall. The other one came singly. He also set up a scaffolding, but he brought a small trowel and started polishing the marble wall. And after some time, everything was finished. And so on the one side, this magnificent painting, there was a series of paintings with angels and cherubs and glorious things, less like Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel paintings. But on the other side was just a polished wall that reflected the other artist. And the king was delighted. He said, the prize goes to you that was doing the small polishing. Small polishing, not the whole thing in one go. Small progressive polishings. Culminating in this wonderful mirror. Because the king not only saw the reflected work of art on the one side, but he also could see himself. An additional bonus. So we have to do this. It's a small purification. And we have all the advantages. Everybody here has a great advantage of being at least interested in this great foundational philosophy that will lead us in a unitive way to a position of freedom. So I'm glad that you're taking advantage of it today, and we need 1,000 tools to do it. The second example is from Ramakrishna, who said, you see, if you have a lamp and you polish it once, even the utensils we use for puja, we have people who come along, very skilled at polishing, and within a very short period of time, the whole thing is sparkling. The copper vessels are sparkling, the bronze vessels or the other vessels that have a gold effect are all shining, brilliant, no evidence of tarnishing. But if you leave it over time without attending to it, the oxidation will come in and they will be tarnished again. So you have to continuously polish the mind. You cannot let it go, no holiday for it. You can't leave it be. If you leave it be, if you leave a house vacant, then it'll be occupied by other things, spiders and insects and what have you. So we have to continuously be observant and see what the condition of the mind is. And we know from our philosophy that there are 3 possible categories that any thought can come into. It can either be of a sattvic nature, completely generous, with no sense of egoism or attachment to the body, mind, or any results of any activities. That is where the ego becomes an open channel for God's grace. Another condition will be egoistic activity, full of meanderings, full of restlessness, thoughts and activities designed for a future result. And then, of course, we have the tamasic aspect, where the mind feels dull, uninterested, despondent. At any moment, we can see and assess what condition is the mind in at this given moment. And once we catch it, don't regret it. You add another negative by doing that. You say, very good. Now, please, I understand where you're coming from. The beauty about the Enneagram and the essence of truth is you understand where it's coming from. You understand where it's coming from. It's fine. And please, that's fine. Here's the exit door. Thank you for your visit. Put in other values: strong, true, wise, full, free, truth, beauty, goodness, love, harmony. Put that in. Continuously doing that. And the more you do that, the more you'll immediately register, oh, some negative condition has come into the mind. That's fine. It's bound to be there. Since the law of nature is frustration, it's bound to be there. I don't expect the world to be free of obstacles, but I expect to have a formula that knows how to get around it. So steady practice. Make sure that there is you take advantage of all the resources around. Be they guru, be they scripture, be they an environment, natural environment, be it a church, a temple, be it at this day and age, be it around YouTube presentations or whatever it is, or here, these talks, these question answer sessions, or whatever resources we have. We have a human body, we have a human mind, and we have an environment which is designed. Nature is designed to be on our side, and we are a part of it. All right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.